The rope burned against Abigail Vaughn's calloused palms as she twisted the hemp fibers with practiced precision, her fingers working in the same rhythm her brother had taught her before consumption stole him from this world 6 months past. It was spring of 1882 in Enid, Oklahoma Territory, and the small workshop that had once echoed with Samuel's laughter now held only the whisper of wind through the cracks in the weathered wooden walls and the steady creak of Abigail's hands at work. She had turned 21 the previous winter, inheriting not just the rope-making business, but also the weight of being alone in a frontier town where women were expected to marry quickly or disappear into the background of respectable society. The bell above the shop door jangled, interrupting her thoughts. Abigail looked up to see a tall cowboy ducking through the entrance, his hat shadowing a face weathered by sun and hard living. He removed his hat respectfully, revealing sandy brown hair and eyes the color of summer grass. "Good morning, miss," he said, his voice deep and genuine. "I hear tell you make the strongest rope in the territory." Abigail set down her work and stood, brushing hemp fragments from her simple brown dress. "That depends on what you need it for, Mr. Gideon Barrett," he introduced himself, extending a hand. She shook it firmly, noting the calluses that matched her own. "I run cattle about 15 miles north of town. Lost half my rope stock in a barn fire last month. Need enough to outfit my operation again." She moved to the wall where finished coils hung in neat rows, each one representing hours of her labor. "I can provide what you need. My brother Samuel, before he passed, taught me everything about twisting fibers into something that holds fast. Our rope does not break easy." Gideon stepped closer to examine the merchandise, and Abigail caught the scent of leather and horses and open prairie. "How did you come to continue his work?" he asked, genuine curiosity in his tone rather than the skepticism she usually encountered. "Because someone had to," she replied simply. "And because I have good hands for it. Strong hands. Samuel always said that making rope is not just about strength, but understanding how fibers want to twist together, how they support each other when bound right." He picked up a coil, testing its weight and flexibility. "Your brother taught you well. This is fine work." He paused, then met her eyes directly. "But it must be hard running this place alone." Abigail straightened her shoulders. "I manage just fine, Mr. Barrett." "I did not mean to suggest otherwise," he said quickly. "I only meant that it is a lot of work for one person. I know that from experience. My ranch is the same. Just me and 2 hired hands trying to keep everything together." She studied him more carefully then, seeing past the dust and the trail-worn clothes to the earnestness in his expression. Most men who came into her shop either dismissed her entirely or made inappropriate suggestions about what a woman alone might need. Gideon Barrett did neither. "How much rope do you need?" she asked, pulling out her ledger. They spent the next hour discussing his requirements, and Abigail found herself drawn into easy conversation about the practical matters of ranching and rope making. Gideon knew cattle, knew the land, and spoke about his work with a passion that reminded her of how Samuel used to talk about creating the perfect twist in a length of rope. "I will need about 2 weeks to complete your full order," she told him after tallying the numbers. "I can have half ready in 1 week if you need something sooner." 2 weeks is fine," Gideon said. He counted out a deposit from a worn leather wallet. "I will be back in town next Saturday for supplies anyway. Could I check on the progress then?" "Of course." He settled his hat back on his head but seemed reluctant to leave. "Miss Vaughn, I wonder if you might join me for supper at the hotel restaurant this evening, as thanks for taking on such a large order on short notice." Abigail hesitated. She had received similar invitations before, and they rarely ended with just supper. But something in Gideon's open expression made her reconsider. "That would be acceptable, Mr. Barrett. I close the shop at 6. "Then I will return at 6, he said, and the smile that crossed his face transformed it entirely, making him seem younger and less careworn. "Thank you, Miss Vaughn." After he left, Abigail stood in the quiet shop and wondered what she had agreed to. She returned to her work, but her mind kept drifting to green eyes and a respectful handshake, and the way Gideon Barrett had looked at her finished rope with genuine appreciation. That evening, she changed from her work dress into her one good outfit, a deep blue dress with modest lace at the collar that had belonged to her mother. She pinned her dark hair up carefully and studied herself in the small mirror. At 21, she knew she was considered past the prime age for marriage by frontier standards, but Samuel's illness had consumed 3 years of her life, and mourning had taken the last 6 months. She had not thought much about courtship or romance, too focused on survival and keeping the business alive. Gideon arrived precisely at 6, cleaned up and wearing a pressed shirt under his vest. He offered his arm, and they walked together down Enid's Main Street toward the hotel. The evening air was pleasant, carrying the scent of dust and horses and cooking fires. "Have you always lived in Enid?" Gideon asked as they walked. "No. Samuel and I came here 5 years ago from Missouri. Our parents died of fever, and Samuel thought we might make a fresh start in the territory." He had learned rope making from our father. She glanced at him. "What about you?" "Texas originally. Worked on various ranches until I saved enough to buy my own land here 3 years back. It is hard work, but it is mine." Pride colored his voice. "Every fence post, every head of cattle, mine." She understood that feeling, the fierce ownership of something built with your own hands. "That is how I feel about the shop. It is small, and some weeks I barely make enough to cover expenses, but it is mine. Samuel's and mine." The hotel restaurant was modest but clean, with checkered tablecloths and oil lamps casting warm light. They ordered the evening special, beef stew with fresh bread, and continued talking. Abigail found herself relaxing in Gideon's company, appreciating how he listened when she spoke and did not talk over her or dismiss her opinions. "It cannot be easy, being a woman running a business alone," Gideon said as they ate. "I imagine you face plenty of folks who think you should give it up." "Every day," Abigail admitted. "The banker suggested I should sell the shop and find a husband to take care of me. The minister's wife keeps trying to set me up with her nephew, who is barely 19 and still lives with his mother. Even my landlord increased my rent, thinking I would not be able to negotiate like Samuel did." Anger flashed across Gideon's face. "That is not right." "No, but it is reality." She took a sip of her coffee. "I proved the landlord wrong, at least. Threatened to move the shop to the building next door, which has better light anyway. He backed down quick enough." Gideon laughed, a rich sound that made her smile in return. "I would have liked to see that." "You would have found it less impressive if you had seen me shaking afterward," Abigail confessed. "I am not naturally bold. I just refuse to give up what Samuel and I built." "That is not lack of boldness. That is courage," Gideon said seriously. "Courage is doing what needs doing even when you are afraid." They talked until the restaurant staff began cleaning up around them, finally stepping out into the cool night air. Gideon walked her back to her shop, where she lived in the small apartment above. "Thank you for the evening," Abigail said at the door. "I enjoyed it. So did I." Gideon seemed to hesitate, then asked, "Miss Vaughn, would you allow me to call on you again? Not just for business, I mean." Her heart beat faster. "You may call me Abigail, and yes, I would like that." His smile returned, bright even in the darkness. "Then you must call me Gideon. I will see you Saturday, Abigail." She watched him walk away toward the boarding house where he was staying, then climbed the stairs to her small apartment. Sleep came slowly that night, her mind full of green eyes and genuine interest, and the possibility of something she had not allowed herself to consider in years. The week passed quickly, as Abigail worked on Gideon's rope order. Her hands moved through the familiar motions of twisting and binding, but her thoughts kept returning to their conversation. Saturday arrived with clear skies, and she found herself watching the door more often than usual. Gideon came in mid-morning, and his face brightened when he saw her. "Good morning, Abigail." "Good morning, Gideon." She showed him the completed portion of his order, and he examined it carefully. "This is exceptional work, better than any rope I have purchased before." He paid her for the completed portion, then asked, "Would you have time for a walk?" "The weather is fine, and I thought you might need a break from the shop." Abigail glanced around the empty shop. Saturday mornings were typically slow. "I suppose I could close for an hour." They walked to the edge of town where the prairie opened up endlessly, grass rippling in the breeze. Gideon talked about his ranch, describing the creek that ran through his property and the small herd he was slowly building. Abigail found herself imagining the place, seeing it through his words. "Would you like to see it?" Gideon asked suddenly. "The ranch, I mean." "I could bring a wagon to town next Saturday and drive you out there if you are willing." "That would be quite an excursion," Abigail said carefully. "People would talk. Let them talk." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Abigail, I am not a man who does things by half measures. I enjoyed our supper last week more than I have enjoyed anything in a long time. I would like to know you better, and I would like you to see what I am building. But if you are not comfortable with that, I understand." She studied his open, honest face and made a decision. "I would like to see your ranch." His answering smile made her glad of her choice. The following Saturday, Gideon arrived with a sturdy wagon and a gentle mare in the traces. He had brought a cushion for the wooden seat and helped Abigail up with careful courtesy. As they drove out of Enid, she felt eyes watching from windows and doorways, but for once she did not care what the gossips would say. The 15 miles passed pleasantly as they talked about everything and nothing. Gideon pointed out landmarks and told stories about the territory. Abigail shared memories of Samuel and their childhood in Missouri. The ease between them felt natural, as if they had known each other far longer than 2 weeks. The ranch appeared as they crested a low hill, and Abigail caught her breath. It was modest, just a small house and barn and scattered out buildings, but it sat in a beautiful spot where a creek wound through cottonwood trees. Cattle grazed across rolling pasture, and the whole scene had a peaceful, settled quality that spoke of someone who cared for the land. "It is not much yet," Gideon said, almost shyly, "but I have plans for expansion." "It is lovely," Abigail said honestly. He drove her around the property, showing her the creek and the small vegetable garden he had started near the house and the new fencing he was installing. 2 ranch hands emerged from the barn, and Gideon introduced them as Tom and Billy, both young men who treated him with obvious respect and Abigail with polite curiosity. Inside the house, Abigail saw evidence of a man living alone. Functional furniture, few decorations, everything clean but spare. The kitchen held basic cooking equipment and a good stove. Large windows faced east, flooding the main room with light. "My mother would have filled this place with curtains and rugs and all manner of softening touches," Gideon said, looking around as if seeing it through her eyes. "I am afraid I focused more on practical matters." "It is a good house," Abigail said, "solid, well built." She walked to the window and looked out at the view of the creek and the prairie beyond. "The light here is beautiful." Gideon came to stand beside her. "I bought this land because of that view." Thought it was the kind of place that could be a real home, not just somewhere to sleep between work days. She heard the longing in his voice, the desire for something more than what he had. When she glanced at him, he was watching her with an expression that made her pulse quicken. "Abigail," he said quietly, "I know we have not known each other long, but I believe in being honest about my intentions. I am looking for a wife, a partner, someone to build a life with." He paused. "I think you might be that person," her breath caught. "That is very direct. I told you I do not do things by half measures." He turned to face her fully. "I am not asking you to give me an answer today, but I wanted you to know what I am hoping for. I see you working in that shop, creating something strong and lasting with your own hands, refusing to give up even when the whole world seems set against you. That is the kind of strength I want beside me." Abigail's mind raced. Part of her wanted to be cautious, to point out that they barely knew each other. But another part recognized the truth in his words. She had felt the connection between them, the easy compatibility. And she was tired of being alone, tired of fighting every battle by herself. "I need time to think," she said finally. "This is not a decision to make lightly." "Of course." Gideon stepped back, giving her space. "Take all the time you need. I just wanted you to know where my heart is headed." They had lunch with Tom and Billy, simple fare of beans and cornbread that the men had prepared. The ranch hands were friendly and told stories about working the cattle that made Abigail laugh. She could see how Gideon had earned their loyalty through fair treatment and hard work. On the drive back to Enid, Abigail felt the weight of the decision before her. Marrying Gideon would mean giving up her independence, at least in part. The shop would have to be managed differently if she lived 15 miles away. But it would also mean partnership, companionship, the chance to build something together. "Thank you for today," she said as they neared town, "for showing me your ranch and for your honesty. Thank you for coming." Gideon glanced at her. "Abigail, whatever you decide, I want you to know that I respect what you have built. If you did choose to marry me, I would not expect you to simply give up the shop. We would find a way to make it work." That assurance meant more than he probably realized. "You are a good man, Gideon Barrett." "I try to be." Over the next 2 weeks, as Abigail finished Gideon's rope order, she thought constantly about his proposal. She sought counsel from the few friends she had in town, but their advice varied wildly. Some thought she would be foolish to pass up a decent man with his own land. Others worried she would lose herself in marriage. In the end, Abigail realized the answer had to come from within. She thought about the loneliness of the past 6 months, the weight of carrying everything alone. She thought about Gideon's kindness, his respect for her work, his honest declaration. She thought about the ranch with its beautiful light and the possibility of a real home. When Gideon came to collect the final portion of his rope order, Abigail had made her decision. "The rope is ready," she told him, gesturing to the neatly coiled bundles. "Your full order, completed as promised." Gideon examined the ropes with his usual care, then paid her the remaining balance. "Excellent work, as always." He hesitated. "Abigail, I know you needed time to think about what I said. I do not want to pressure you, but I wondered if you had reached any conclusions." She took a deep breath. "I have. The answer is yes." His eyes widened. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." The words came more easily than she expected. "I have thought about little else for 2 weeks, and I keep coming back to the same conclusion. I enjoy your company. I respect you. I think we could build a good life together." Gideon crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and took her hands. "You have made me very happy. I promise you will not regret this." "I have conditions," Abigail said quickly. "I want to keep the shop running even if I cannot be here every day. We need to figure out how to manage that." "We will." Gideon's smile was radiant. We could hire someone to help run it, or I could come to town more often so you can work. Whatever we need to do, we will make it work." They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Enid. Abigail wore the blue dress from their first dinner together, and Gideon wore his best suit. Tom and Billy stood as witnesses, along with a few townspeople who had become friendly with Abigail over the years. The minister's words washed over her as she stood beside Gideon, his hand warm and steady in hers. When he spoke his vows, his voice was firm and sure. When she spoke hers, she meant every word. "With this ring, I bind my life to yours," Gideon said, slipping a simple gold band onto her finger. "Like the ropes you make, may we be twisted together, strong and lasting." Tears pricked Abigail's eyes at the reference to her work, to the skills Samuel had taught her. It felt like a blessing across time, her brother's legacy woven into this new beginning. They held a small celebration at the hotel afterward, and several of Gideon's neighboring ranchers came to wish them well. Abigail met more people in those few hours than she had in years of running the shop, and she was surprised by how welcoming most of them were. As evening fell, they drove out to the ranch in the wagon, now loaded with Abigail's belongings. She had arranged for a younger woman in town, a widow named Catherine who needed work, to manage the rope shop 3 days a week. Abigail would return to town the other days to handle orders and production. It was not a perfect solution, but it was workable. The ranch looked different as they approached in the gathering darkness, lights glowing from the windows. Tom and Billy had decorated the porch with wildflowers and lanterns, a gesture that touched Abigail deeply. "Welcome home, Mrs. Barrett," Tom said with a shy grin as he helped unload her things. Mrs. Barrett. The name felt strange and new, but not unwelcome. That night, alone with her new husband in the house that was now her home, Abigail felt a mix of nervousness and anticipation. Gideon seemed to sense her uncertainty. "We do not have to rush anything," he said gently. "I know this is all very new." "I am glad I said yes," Abigail told him. "I want you to know that. I am just adjusting to all the changes. So am I." He smiled and took her hand. "But I think we will figure it out together." And they did, slowly learning the rhythms of married life. Abigail rose early to help with morning chores before heading to town on her work days. She discovered she enjoyed working with the cattle, like the physical labor and the satisfaction of tangible results. Gideon supported her rope work completely, often driving her to town himself, and using the time to handle ranch business. The arrangement with Catherine worked well. The younger woman proved to be a quick learner, and Abigail found she could trust her to handle basic orders while reserving the more complex work for herself. The shop continued to thrive, with Gideon's satisfaction spreading word about her quality to other ranchers in the region. But it was the small moments of daily life that surprised Abigail most. Morning coffee shared while watching sunrise over the prairie. Gideon's strong hands gentle as he helped her down from the wagon. The way he listened when she talked about her day, genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions. The comfort of falling asleep beside someone who cared about her safety and happiness. 3 months into their marriage, they fell into an easy partnership that felt as natural as breathing. Abigail no longer thought of the shop and the ranch as separate parts of her life, but as pieces of a larger whole. She was no longer just the ropemaker's sister, trying to survive alone. She was Gideon's wife, his partner, building something together. One evening in late summer, they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the prairie. Gideon had his arm around her shoulders, and Abigail leaned into his warmth. "You remember what you said when we first met?" Gideon asked. "About how your brother taught you that making rope is understanding how fibers twist together to support each other." "I remember." I think about that sometimes, how it applies to us. He turned to look at her. We are like that, I think. Two separate strands that are stronger twisted together than we ever were apart. Abigail felt her throat tighten with emotion. That is exactly what it is like. He kissed her then, sweet and tender, and she kissed him back with all the feeling that had been growing in her heart since that first meeting in the shop. What had started as respect and attraction had deepened into something far more profound. She loved him, she realized. Loved his kindness and his strength and his unwavering support of her dreams. I love you, she whispered against his lips. I love you too, Gideon replied. Have since that first day, I think. You were standing there with hemp in your hair and determination in your eyes, and I knew I had found something special. That night marked a deeper connection between them, physical and emotional, the final barrier falling away as they truly became partners in every sense. As autumn approached, Abigail discovered she was pregnant. The realization brought a mix of joy and fear. She told Gideon one morning as they worked together mending fence line, the words tumbling out before she could second-guess herself. I am going to have a baby. Gideon dropped the fence post he was holding and turned to her with wide eyes. Are you certain? As certain as I can be. I have missed 2 monthly courses and I have been sick every morning for a week. She twisted her hands together nervously. Are you pleased? Pleased? Gideon whooped with joy and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. I am more than pleased. I am thrilled. A baby, Abigail, our baby. His happiness erased her fears. They told Tom and Billy that evening, and the ranch hands were equally excited, immediately offering to help with any additional work so Abigail could rest. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall and into winter. Abigail continued working at the shop, though she reduced her hours as she grew larger. Catherine proved invaluable, taking on more responsibility and eventually hiring a young man to help with the heavier aspects of production. Gideon fussed over Abigail constantly, insisting she not lift anything heavy and bringing her tea and whatever foods she craved. His attentiveness sometimes felt overwhelming, but it also made her feel cherished and safe. You are going to be a wonderful father, she told him one evening as they sat by the fire. Snow fell outside, blanketing the ranch in quiet white. I hope so. He placed his hand on her swollen belly, and the baby kicked in response. His expression of wonder never failed to touch her heart. I want to give our children everything. Love, security, the freedom to pursue whatever dreams they have. They will be lucky to have you, Abigail said softly. The baby arrived in early March of 1883 during a late winter storm. The labor was long and difficult, with only the doctor from town and a neighbor woman to help. Gideon paced outside their bedroom, Tom and Billy keeping him company and trying to distract him from the sounds of Abigail's pain. When the baby's first cry finally rang out, Gideon burst into the room despite the doctor's protests. He found Abigail exhausted but smiling, holding a red-faced, screaming infant wrapped in blankets. A son, the doctor announced, healthy and strong. Gideon knelt beside the bed, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his wife and child. You are amazing, he told Abigail. So strong, so brave. Would you like to hold him? She asked and carefully transferred the baby to Gideon's arms. Watching her husband hold their son for the first time, Abigail felt a completeness she had not known was missing. This was her family. These two were hers to love and protect and build a life with. They named him Samuel, after her brother. Samuel Gideon Barrett, carrying forward the legacy of the man who had taught Abigail everything about creating something strong and lasting. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and overwhelming and wonderful. Abigail stepped back from the shop almost entirely, focusing on caring for Samuel while her body recovered from childbirth. Catherine and her assistant managed the business capably, proving that Abigail's systems and training were sound. Gideon proved to be as devoted a father as he was a husband. He walked the floor with Samuel during fussy nights, changed diapers without complaint, and spoke to his son constantly in a low, soothing voice that usually calmed the baby's cries. "You are a natural at this," Abigail told him one morning as she watched him feed Samuel a bottle. "I just remember what my own father did," Gideon replied. "He was a good man, patient and kind. I want to be the same for our boy." As Samuel grew from infant to toddler, Abigail gradually returned to the shop, bringing him along sometimes or leaving him with Gideon when possible. The flexibility of working for herself and being married to an understanding partner made balancing motherhood and business possible in a way it would not have been otherwise. The rope shop continued to prosper, expanding its customer base across the territory. Abigail developed a reputation for quality that brought orders from as far away as Texas and Kansas. She hired 2 more assistants, training them in the techniques Samuel had taught her, ensuring his methods would not be lost. The ranch prospered too. Gideon expanded his herd and improved his grazing land, building the operation into one of the most successful in the region. He and Abigail worked together on major decisions, each respecting the other's expertise and input. When Samuel was 2 years old, Abigail became pregnant again. This time the news came with less surprise but equal joy. Their daughter was born in the autumn of 1885, arriving quickly and easily compared to her brother's difficult birth. "She is perfect," Gideon said, cradling the tiny girl. "What should we call her?" Abigail had thought about this carefully. "Grace, after your mother." Gideon's eyes filled with tears. His mother had died the previous year, never getting to meet her grandson but leaving her son with words of blessing for his growing family. Grace Barrett, she would have loved that. With 2 children, life became even busier. The rope shop ran largely without Abigail's daily involvement, though she still handled major orders and maintained quality control. She found she did not mind stepping back, discovering that motherhood brought its own satisfactions. Samuel grew into a curious, energetic boy who loved following his father around the ranch. Grace was calmer, watching everything with serious dark eyes that reminded Gideon of Abigail. The children were loved not just by their parents but by Tom and Billy, who had become like uncles, and by the growing circle of friends and neighbors that made up their community. One evening when Samuel was 5 and Grace was 3, Abigail and Gideon sat on their porch as they had so many times before. The children were asleep inside, the ranch was quiet, and the stars blazed overhead in the clear prairie sky. "You ever think about that first day we met?" Abigail asked, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "All the time." Gideon kissed the top of her head. "I walked into that shop looking for rope and found my whole future instead." "I was so suspicious of you," Abigail admitted with a laugh. "Certain you must have ulterior motives." "I did have ulterior motives, just not the kind you were worried about." He squeezed her hand. "I took one look at you and knew I was in trouble. Beautiful, fierce, talented. How could I not want to know you better? You were very persistent. I knew what I wanted." He turned to face her more fully. "Abigail, these past years with you have been the best of my life. You have given me children, partnership, love. You have made this ranch into a real home. I cannot imagine my life without you in it. I feel the same." Abigail touched his face gently. "I was so alone before you, so focused on just surviving day to day. You showed me what it means to truly live." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, holding hands and watching the stars. Inside, they could hear Samuel talking in his sleep, spinning some dream story. Grace would be curled up with her favorite blanket, thumb in her mouth. "You ever miss it?" Gideon asked. Running the shop full-time, being independent, Abigail considered the question carefully. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of having only myself to worry about. But I would not trade what we have for anything. This life, our family, our partnership, this is what I was meant for. We are like your ropes," Gideon said softly. "Individual fibers twisted together, creating something stronger than either of us could be alone." "Twisted fibers, strong," Abigail agreed. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the grief of losing Samuel to the loneliness of running the shop alone to the day Gideon Barrett walked through her door and changed everything. "You asked me to bind my life with yours, and it was the best decision I ever made." "Best decision I ever made was walking into that rope shop," Gideon replied. "Though I think fate had a hand in it too. Some things are just meant to be." The years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of ranch life. Samuel grew tall and strong, learning rope making from his mother and ranching from his father. Grace proved to have a head for business, helping Abigail manage the shop's accounts and eventually taking over much of the administrative work. When Samuel turned 16, he asked to learn more about running the rope business. Abigail taught him everything her brother had taught her, watching with pride as her son's hands learned the same twists and patterns that had sustained her through so many difficult years. He had a natural talent for it, understanding instinctively how fibers work together to create strength. Grace married at 19 to a banker's son from a nearby town, a good man who treated her with respect and encouraged her sharp mind. The wedding was held at the ranch, with what seemed like half the territory attending to celebrate. "She will be happy," Gideon said as they watched Grace and her new husband drive away in their decorated wagon. "He is a good match for her, I know." Abigail wiped away tears. "But she was just born yesterday. How did she grow up so fast? Time does not slow down for anyone." Gideon pulled her close. "But we still have each other, and Samuel, and someday grandchildren." That prediction came true sooner than expected. Within a year, Grace announced she was expecting. Her daughter, Abigail's first grandchild, was born in the summer of 1901. They named her Sarah, and from the moment Abigail held the tiny girl, she understood in a new way the love her own parents must have felt. Samuel, meanwhile, had taken over the rope shop entirely. At 22, he managed the business with skill and innovation, introducing new techniques while maintaining the quality standards his mother and uncle had established. He married a rancher's daughter, a practical woman named Martha who fit perfectly into their family. As the new century progressed, Abigail and Gideon gradually stepped back from active management of both ranch and shop. Tom and Billy had long since retired to small parcels of land Gideon had helped them purchase. New ranch hands had come and gone over the years, but the operation ran smoothly under Samuel's oversight, with help from Gideon's guidance. The rope shop expanded beyond anything Abigail had imagined, supplying not just local ranchers but shipping products across the growing nation. Catherine, now elderly, still came in occasionally to reminisce about the early days when she first learned the trade. Abigail and Gideon spent their days on the porch of the ranch house, watching their grandchildren play in the yard where their own children had once run. They had been married nearly 30 years, and the love between them had only deepened with time. "You remember asking me if I had conditions when I said I would marry you?" Abigail asked one autumn afternoon. They were both in their 50s now, hair gray and faces lined but still strong and healthy. "I remember everything about that day," Gideon replied. I was so worried about losing my independence, about being swallowed up in marriage." She shook her head at her younger self. "I did not understand yet that real partnership does not diminish either person. It multiplies them." "You taught me that," Gideon said. "You showed me what it means to truly share a life with someone, not just the good parts, but everything. The struggles and fears and uncertainties, too." They watched Samuel working with horses in the near pasture, his own son beside him learning the family trade. Grace's children were visiting for the week, filling the house with noise and laughter. The rope shop in town bore a sign that read Barrett and Son, though Abigail's techniques and standards remained at its heart. "We built something good," Abigail said softly, "something that will last beyond us." "We did." Gideon took her hand, his fingers still fitting perfectly between hers after all these years. "But the best thing we built is this. Us. The two of us, twisted together like those ropes, strong enough to weather anything." As sunset painted the prairie in shades of gold and crimson, Abigail leaned against her husband and thought about the long journey from that day he first walked into her shop. She had been alone then, grieving and struggling, certain she had to carry every burden by herself. Gideon had shown her a different way, offering partnership instead of domination, respect instead of control. "I love you," she said, words she had spoken thousands of times but which still held the weight of truth. "I love you too," Gideon replied. "Then, now, and always." The children called them in for supper, and they rose together, hand in hand, walking into the house that had been their home for 3 decades. The table was crowded with family, multiple generations gathered to share a meal and each other's company. This was the legacy they had created, not just in land or business but in love and connection. As Abigail looked around the table at the faces of her children and grandchildren, she felt profound gratitude for the day a cowboy walked into her shop and saw not just a woman struggling to survive, but a partner worth pursuing. He had asked her to bind her life with his, using the language of her craft to make his proposal. And in binding their lives together, they had created something far stronger than either could have built alone. The meal was full of laughter and stories, children interrupting and grandchildren demanding attention. Gideon caught Abigail's eye across the table and smiled, that same smile that had captured her heart all those years ago. She smiled back, feeling the connection between them as tangible as the ropes she still occasionally crafted in her small workshop behind the house. Later that night, in the bedroom they had shared for 30 years, Gideon held Abigail close as they prepared for sleep. Through the open window came the sounds of the prairie at night, familiar and comforting. "No regrets?" Gideon asked softly, a question he posed sometimes even after all these years. "Not a single one," Abigail replied honestly. "You gave me everything I needed and things I did not even know to want. Family, partnership, love that only grows stronger with time. You gave me the same." He kissed her forehead. "I was just a cowboy with a ranch and a dream. You made it all real." They drifted toward sleep, comfortable in each other's presence. Abigail's last conscious thought was of twisted fibers and binding strength, and the way love could take 2 separate strands and weave them into something unbreakable. She had been the ropemaker's sister once, alone and fighting to survive. Now she was wife, mother, grandmother, partner. She was half of a whole that made complete sense. The years continued their march, bringing both joy and sorrow as all years do. There were more grandchildren, and eventually great-grandchildren. The rope shop passed entirely to Samuel's control and then to his son after him. The ranch evolved with changing times, adapting to new methods while maintaining the land stewardship Gideon had always practiced. Abigail and Gideon grew old together, their steps slower but their bond unshakable. They celebrated 50 years of marriage surrounded by an enormous family, all descended from their union. The celebration was held at the ranch, tables set up across the yard, food and music and dancing late into the night. 50 years, Abigail marveled as they danced slowly, bodies moving with the memory of youth even if the reality was different. Half a century with you. Best 50 years of my life, Gideon said. His hair was white now, his face deeply lined, but his eyes still held that same green intensity that had caught her attention so long ago. Here is to 50 more. They both knew that was unlikely at their age, but the sentiment was genuine. If they could have eternity together, they would take it gladly. As they aged into their 70s, health began to fail in small ways. Gideon's joints ached from decades of hard ranch work. Abigail's hands, once so strong and nimble, developed arthritis that made rope-making difficult. But they faced these changes as they had faced everything, together and with grace. Samuel and Martha moved into the main ranch house to help care for them, while Grace visited regularly with her family. The great-grandchildren brought constant entertainment, their young energy filling the house with life. One spring morning, Abigail woke to find Gideon watching her with an expression of deep contentment. They were both in their late 70s now, each day a gift. "What are you thinking?" she asked, her voice scratchy with age and sleep. "That I am the luckiest man who ever lived," Gideon replied. "To have had you beside me all these years, to have built this life together, a man could not ask for more." "We were blessed," Abigail agreed, "in so many ways." They spent that day as they spent many days now, on the porch watching the world go by. Samuel managed the ranch, great-grandchildren played in the yard, and life continued its endless cycle. But there was peace in knowing they had done their part, built their portion, left their mark. "Do you remember the first rope I ordered from you?" Gideon asked. "Of course. You needed enough to outfit your entire operation after the barn fire." Abigail smiled at the memory. "You examined every coil so carefully. I thought you would never be satisfied." "I was already satisfied. I just wanted an excuse to keep talking to you," he chuckled. "Best business deal I ever made." That night, they went to bed as usual, bodies aching but hearts full. Gideon held Abigail close, as he had every night for more than 50 years. They talked quietly about small things, family news and weather and memories, until sleep claimed them both. Gideon died peacefully in his sleep that night, his heart simply stopping after nearly 8 decades of faithful beating. Abigail woke at dawn to find him gone, his face peaceful and his hand still holding hers. The grief was profound, a physical pain that made breathing difficult. They had been together so long that she felt incomplete without him, like a rope unraveling without its binding twist. But even through the sorrow, Abigail felt gratitude for every moment they had shared. They had been blessed with a long life together, with love that had endured and deepened through the decades. Gideon was buried on the ranch he had built, on a hill overlooking the creek and the prairie beyond. The funeral drew hundreds of people whose lives he had touched, whose businesses he had helped, whose families he had befriended. They spoke of his kindness, his integrity, his devotion to his wife and family. Abigail stood beside the grave, supported by Samuel and Grace, and spoke her own tribute. "He was the best man I ever knew. He saw me when I was alone and struggling, and he offered me partnership instead of domination. He spent 53 years showing me what real love looks like. I was blessed beyond measure to be his wife." In the months that followed, Abigail discovered she was stronger than she thought. The grief remained, a constant ache, but she found ways to continue. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her with love. She returned to the small workshop behind the house, finding comfort in the familiar motions of twisting fiber into rope, creating strength from individual strands. One afternoon, working on a special order for her great-grandson who was starting his own small ranch, Abigail realized something profound. The skills Samuel had taught her, the business she had built, the family she and Gideon had created together, these were all forms of rope-making. Taking separate elements and twisting them together into something stronger than the individual parts. She thought about the scared young woman she had been at 21, alone and uncertain, but determined to survive. She thought about the cowboy who had walked into her shop and seen not just a means to an end but a person worth knowing. She thought about the life they had built together, strand by careful strand, until they had something unbreakable. Abigail lived another 5 years after Gideon's death, watching more great-grandchildren be born, seeing the rope business expand to a second location, celebrating Samuel's retirement and his son taking over ranch operations. She remained sharp and engaged, her family's matriarch and the keeper of their history. When her own time came, in the early spring of her 83rd year, she was ready. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her bed, holding her hands and speaking words of love. As her breathing slowed and her vision dimmed, Abigail felt no fear. She was going to Gideon, to be reunited with the man who had been her partner and love for more than half her life. Her last words were clear and strong. Tell the children about the ropes. How individual fibers must be twisted together to be strong. That is the secret to everything. Then she closed her eyes and slipped away, peaceful and content. They buried her beside Gideon on that hill overlooking the prairie, their matching headstones reading simply, Gideon and Abigail Barrett. Twisted together, strong forever. The rope shop continued for generations, always bearing the Barrett name and always maintaining the quality standards Abigail had established. The ranch prospered and evolved with changing times, but it remained in the family, passed from parent to child in an unbroken line. And in the living room of the main ranch house, displayed in a place of honor, hung a length of rope that Abigail had made the day before Gideon died. Beside it was a small plaque with her words, "Individual fibers, twisted together, become stronger than either could be alone. This is the secret to rope, to marriage, to family, to life itself." Generations of Barrett descendants grew up learning that lesson, understanding that their family's strength came not from any individual achievement, but from the binding together of many lives in support and love. They learned about the ropemaker's sister, who had built a business through determination and skill, and the cowboy who had seen her worth and offered partnership. But most of all, they learned about twisted fibers made strong, and how two people who bind their lives together in true partnership can create something that lasts far beyond their own years. That legacy of love and respect and genuine partnership was the real inheritance Gideon and Abigail left behind, more valuable than any land or business or material wealth. Their story became family legend, told and retold with each generation, a reminder of what real love looks like and what can be built when two people commit to facing life as true partners. The ropemaker's sister and the cowboy who asked her to bind her life with his had created something that would never break, something that would last as long as family memory endured. Their love story became the foundation on which all future generations built their own lives, a standard of partnership and devotion that guided the family forward through changing times and new challenges. And somewhere on that hill overlooking the Oklahoma prairie, under open sky and endless grass, Gideon and Abigail Barrett rested side by side, their love story complete, their legacy secured, their binding permanent and unbreakable even in death. They had lived well, loved deeply, and left behind something far more valuable than they had inherited. That was the true measure of a life well lived, and in that measure they had succeeded beyond all expectation.